All right, well, I'd like to officially welcome everyone to Mind Mapping Shakespeare. Unleash your creativity with your writer's brain. My name is Shelley Hayduck, and I'm co-hosting this event with Matt Caton, our Director of Customer Solutions.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Thy gifts, thy tables are within my brain, full charactered with lasting memory. So, just a quick little quote that I like to refer to from time to time from Shakespeare. And in summary, that basically means everything I know, all the information I have, it is within my brain, and I'll never forget. And it couldn't be more poignant for today's webinar. We will be talking about different types of writing techniques and ways to use the brain, creative ways to use the brain to enhance your creativity, and with a special focus on Shakespeare at one point in the webinar. And Shakespeare was quite the visionary, putting everything in his brain. I think he was referring to his organic brain, but I like to believe that he was predicting the future a little bit and would have done all of his writing in a digital brain, so he would never forget or lose that important data. We'll be covering those topics today. Thanks for joining us.
Very nice. Well, I'm going to kick things off just with the overview of a general writer's brain, and then we're going to jump into Matt's amazing and very enthralling Shakespeare's brain. So let me just get started here in terms of how you can use your brain for idea warehousing and creative knowledge capture. So one of the things as a writer or creative that you struggle with is writer's block. Where do we get started? Or, oh no, I have to write another company brochure. Or my deadline for the next episode of a TV show that I'm working on is coming through. So the cool thing about the brain, as Matt said, in terms of putting everything in it, is becomes what I like to call the inspirational warehouse. So this particular brain is all about writing. It's actually a very sanitized version of a brain that I use myself for creative writing. I do, as part of marketing the brain, a lot of blog writing. I do a lot of creative writing on other projects. So whether you are a designer or a writer per se, or a student, as your day goes about, you're going to find snippets of knowledge, and that piece of knowledge may not necessarily be extremely relevant to you right now when you're on a conference call or you have another deadline. But when you put it away in your trusted place, in your brain, it's always available to you. So when the moment comes and you need that little inspiration, it's right there. So pieces of information in my brain, our brain, are what we call thoughts. And as I click on any thought, the central item moves to the middle of the screen, and I get all relevant information displayed around it. So I can go into my corporate brochures section, and you can see that I've got a document attached to a thought. And I've also got links to something that I did in 2021 with relevant documentation. So all my supporting information is available. And I can continue to kind of go through this brain just to give you an idea of some types of things you might want to put in a more general writer's brain. And then we're going to obviously dive right in much more deeply into Shakespeare. So for instance, if you were doing script writing, you actually could have various links to, of course, the next script that you're writing. And this, of course, can launch the document. I can do version control in this particular document. I can add new ideas. So if I want to add my backup story, I can just come in here and make a thought. And with that, I can actually go ahead and attach any kind of document. If I want to create a new piece of information, I can do that. I can add an event. I can add from a file. I can link to an existing document. So there's a lot that I can do to go ahead and add. And I can also just go ahead and take a note. If this story does not pan out, I'm thinking about this. So you can see that I've got this note, and maybe this particular story, I need some inspiration. So I can link to any number of things in my brain, or I can go to specific areas in my brain. I'm just going to go back to the top of the brain, so we'll come back to the backup story. So you might be inspired, for instance, by graphic novels and comics. So you can have links to all kinds of things from Batman, and there's a new Batman movie coming out, to Superman comics, to all kinds of things. And of course, each one of these items can be connected to something else. So this particular comic book, The Dark Knight Returns, is related to a concept of symbolism. And of course, you can see I have the definition of that, what symbolism is in terms of writing from an arts and religious perspective and things like that, in my elements of story section. So for all you students or teachers, you can get a sense of how you can break down concepts in your brain and actually utilize these concepts linking to their most relevant sources. So in this particular section, I've broken down all the different elements of story, from conflict to symbolism to setting and plot. And then of course, I can take these different things that I'm thinking about, like if I'm looking at new settings, or maybe I'm a location scout even for a conference. And this is all the research I'm doing on different castles and different entry points and churches and things for a story that I'm working on called The Blue Rose. And then I've got information on character development and so on and so forth. And that's under fiction in my writing projects back at the top of my brain. So it's very easy to kind of make ideas merge together and be inspired. And if I just want to find something really quickly, like, okay, let's just talk about the Blue Rose, I can simply go ahead and search for it. I can see every document that I have about the Blue Rose. If I just want to go to my Blue Rose character development document really quick, I can go ahead and do that. And the other thing that's nice about that is that these lateral connections, this particular piece of fiction that I have, I not only have my documents below as child thoughts, but it's related to, I got some inspiration from Edgar Allan Poe, an author, a fiction author and poet in my brain. And what I also like to encourage all creatives to do is create a section on your brain of who you're inspired by. So, I mean, obviously, if you're in architecture, and we won't have time for this today because we're going to jump into Shakespeare, but I have a full architecture brain on like mid-century modernism and things like that. The brain is so much fun as well to integrate this stuff because you get this visual component. Like, I actually need these writers as references for what I'm going to do, but you can see how fun it is to kind of like look at different pictures. So for instance, these are all interesting heroines that we can have, and some of them are older and some of them are newer and some of them are just in there for fun, like Wonder Woman. But one of the nice things about the brain is the multi-dimensional categorization that you get with the software, in addition to adding those notes, those documents and files. So heroines is under the heroine's journey, what I'm inspired by, and characters. So if I'm doing character development, I can get to this thought, I can get to it from many different angles. And if I'm sharing this brain, people will discover this information very easily as well. So I'm just going to go click on this area, and this takes me to a book, a theory of the heroine's journey, which is a little bit of a tangent and a subtopic of Joseph Campbell, the famous theorist and writer who wrote The Hero with a Thousand Faces. So that's very cool. And that's under elements of story, because he essentially took the hero's journey outline, which is normally displayed as a diagram, and broke it down for writers who are fiction writers so that they can really get a sense of, well, what elements of story does my writing have? And from there, of course, I can actually not only look at these different sections of a story or piece of fiction that I'm working on, but I can actually start working on a document, start looking at my key ideas. And I'm actually, one particular character in one writing piece I'm doing is a mentor. So she's listed under that particular theory. And that, of course, takes me back to my character section in that story I'm working on. So that's kind of the nutshell. I'm just going to actually go back to the top of this brain before we get into Shakespeare. A few other things you might want to have in just a general writer's brain. Writer's resources. This is a great area, whether you are a member of a particular guild or organization. This is where you can link to all that kind of fun stuff, publishing rights. And again, any piece of thought, any thought can have any piece of information attached to it. So I've got this web page attached. It's very easy to go out and get new pieces of information and add them in the brain. I also have a very nice grammar section, which, believe it or not, sometimes I need to check things up. So I have a link to the Urban Dictionary. And of course, we'll have some interesting things that you can look up, and the Associated Press style book if you're doing more. That's a link to something I want to buy on Amazon, but I can also add information off the web. So let me just go ahead real quick and do a search for grammar. And let's say I want to add a new resource. There's Grammarly, online tool to check grammar. That's kind of cool. That seems like it would fit just great in my grammar section as a writer's resource. So I've got this piece of information up. All I have to do is drag and drop this, and I'm going to drop it under grammar. And that's going to go ahead and create a new thought in my brain. There it is. And if it depends how the URL comes up, I can actually go in here and change this. So let me just go ahead and retype this. I'm going to call this, rename the thought here. Well, it's kind of having a little trouble clicking now. But anyway, you can go in and change a thought name. I won't change that one, but if I want to change this writing essays thought, I can come in here and change it to writing essays for master's degree, or whatever it is you want to change your thought name to as you're adding these pieces of content. And then of course, organizing all your writing projects in one place with all their relevant links. So that's kind of an overview. I think with that, Matt, unless anyone, we can always circle back to this brain. I think we're going to dive in a little deeper to the Bard. So without
Fantastic.
further ado, or much ado about nothing, I think I'll pass presenter over to you. So
Wonderful
that
transition. Thank you. And really, Shelley, I love the fact that you were talking about writers' resources. I've actually got two different brains that I'm going to be sharing with you today, and I've got resources sections in both. And that's so important to a writer, regardless of what your tools are, your resources that you're using, a document that you've created, web pages that you frequent, just having them all collected in one reliable resource is just really, really so valuable. So that's a really great takeaway from today's webinar. Now, for today's webinar, we talked about, or when we announced, the topics of today's webinar, there were 5 specific bullet points that we are going to be covering: organizing, idea warehousing, brainstorming, working in a nonlinear format, and aggregating your data. And I'm going to break down and show you how, those 5 bullet points work in my Shakespeare Brain. So you should see on the screen right now, I'm sharing my Shakespeare Brain. And this is a brain that you will all have access to, as well as Shelley's writing brain. Paul had the question, will these brains be available? And yes, we'll have samples that you can download to play with on your own, or just visit our brains online to peruse through these brains that we've created. So number 1, organizing, the first bullet point. So let me take you through how I have organized my Shakespeare brain. First and foremost, I am not a Rhodes Scholar on Shakespeare. I simply enjoy reading Shakespeare and have done some Shakespearean plays in the past, and I'm just a fan. So I've collected all of his literature in one location in the brain. That's nothing new. I didn't recreate the wheel there. You could go on to Oxford website and find all of the works by Shakespeare. I think 30 something plays, 54 sonnets and 8 poems, if my memory serves me correctly. I could look that up in my, if I just click on literature, I could look that up, see if I'm right. 38 plays, 154 sonnets, 8 poems. So these are the full, complete works of Shakespeare. And I like to save each Shakespearean work, whether it's a play or a poem or what have you, in the notes section of the brain. So if I just go into history, and I want to take a look at Henry IV, Part 1. There is the complete play of Henry IV, Part 1. So I can scroll through, and that is the entire play right there in the note. That's how I like to save all of this information. My file attachments that I associate sometimes with thoughts are overviews. So here I just clicked on the file attachment. It's an MD file, which means markdown. And that means I can actually edit the note. I don't edit, obviously, Shakespeare's works, but I keep my own notes on character studies, on the plays themselves. If I'm going to go see a Shakespearean play, quite often just my routine is I'll read the play first at home, and then I'll make my own notes on the play or gather them from things I find on the web that I think are interesting, just to have some fun and do a little bit of research and then go and enjoy the play. But it's not just Shakespeare's creative works that are in this particular brain. What I really like about putting all of my Shakespearean knowledge in the brain is that I can also collect my own thoughts, my own resources, and interests in Shakespeare. So I've got Shakespearean games. Some of these I annoy my kids with. I play Shakespearean games, word games, and things like that that you can purchase. Of course, no Shakespearean fan is ever complete unless he has the Shakespeare action figure, which I do. And also movies that are Shakespeare. And it may come as no surprise that there's plenty of Shakespearean movies out there, but there's also plenty of movies that you may not have thought of that are based on Shakespeare. And I'll just give you one example. I could go right into The Lion King. What is the story of The Lion King? Well, a young prince, his father is killed by his uncle, the king's brother. So he's banished, leaves town, returns later to defend his honor, reclaim the kingdom, and kill his uncle. I've just told you the synopsis of both The Lion King and Hamlet, Prince of Denmark. So you might be surprised well, I'll get to that one in a minute, but you might be surprised at the different movies that are out there these days that are really, really, when you take a closer look or just a high level overview, that's based on a Shakespearean sort of plot line. And of course, down below are my own personal character studies. There, once again, as the attachment is the MD file, which is just a quick synopsis of the story of Hamlet in about 4 paragraphs. Also in this brain is my own personal timeline that I've put together. Now, this is where it really all starts coming together. Of course, you can go, like I said, to any number of different web pages and find the complete works of Shakespeare online and read through the play and really enjoy it. But when you start looking at when that play was written, in Shakespeare's life, the collective works, other people that were writing plays at the same time, what they were about, political events that were happening during the time that these plays were being written, and so forth. It starts to take on some greater meaning and greater context. And if I go into my resources area, now I've got a lot of resources for Shakespeare, and we'll be covering many of these. Shakespeare's not easy to read. You need to look up words, you need to look up definitions, you need to understand sort of his process, iambic pentameter of the flow of his language and so forth. So I've got a lot of research, Shakespeare in the news and so forth, but I really love the timeline that I've sort of collected. Once again, I'm no rogue scholar. I've found factual information about when he was born, where, years that he wrote different plays and who he was working for at the time. Shakespeare didn't always write for free. He needed to feed the family, so quite often he was hired by the Lord Chamberlain at the time. For example, so in 1594, he worked for the Lord Chamberlain, and these are the plays that he wrote while he was working there, or for him, for the Lord Chamberlain, then moving on to the Globe, the Kingsman, and so forth. Now, let's jump all the way to sort of his retirement, his final plays. The last play that he ever wrote is The Tempest. Now, if you're to just sit down and read The Tempest, it's a little weird and you might understand everything. But if you also understand that at the end of The Tempest, sort of the main character, Prospero, bids adieu and sort of breaks what they call the fourth wall and speaks to the audience, says goodbye to the audience, says goodbye to this continent that he's leaving in the play. And it's Shakespeare's way of saying goodbye to the audience and goodbye to the world. He knows maybe that he's done. He's retiring and he won't be around much longer. He wasn't an old man, but people didn't live to be really old men, I guess, back in the day. So it really gives The Tempest greater context and sort of chokes you up a little, thinking, "Wow, this is Shakespeare's farewell to the stage, the life of theater," and that's really, I think, a moving discovery that I'm sure other people have made, but when I discovered it on my own, I just thought it was really great. And here I can see that, yes, The Tempest, it is called a comedy. It's not so funny, but regardless, it was his last play and his farewell to his lifestyle. And of course, I have some other movies that are written in sort of the storyline of The Tempest, Shakespeare in Love, which I'm sure a lot of people know, but also Forbidden Planet is loosely based on the whereabouts of, this family or group of people lost at sea in The Tempest, lost in space in the movies. So that's some of the value that collecting all of this information brings to me when I collect all of my Shakespearean stories and facts and information about Shakespeare. So next, let's talk a little bit more about organizing just individual topics, individual thoughts. I'm going to jump into A Midsummer Night's Dream. So one of my favorite comedy plays, and I keep some character studies down below. And this is a nice segue into working non-linearly as well. So once again, A Midsummer Night's Dream, I've got the full play on display right here in the notes. I have my character studies, but notice I've got each character broken down and I'm starting to use the brain's formatting in the notes. So really quickly, let's talk a bit about the notes. Notes can be formatted using Markdown. Markdown is a very easy to grasp and understand formatting system. If you're not familiar with Markdown, I'll just share with you, you can click on the question mark in the notes icon to take you to the brain's Markdown cheat sheet, our reference guide. And it shows you what button to press, what you would type in manually, and what the output ends up being. And I am using these pound signs. So 1 pound sign becomes a title, 2 pound signs is a subtitle, 3 is a heading, and so forth. So it just simply groups things together nicely. By using these, I can actually minimize. If I want to minimize all of the lovers within the play, focus on royalty, or focus on the fairies, or I think they're called the mechanicals, the people that put on the play within the play. It's a really nice formatting structure. However, at the very top, and let me actually delete this and just recreate it for you. I have added a table of contents. So by using those formatting, titles, subtitles, headings, and subheadings, you can actually start putting together quite a bit of content. If I start expanding everything out again, all my different characters and screenshots and so forth, it's a long scrolling page. If I were to print this out, it's probably maybe 10 or 12 pages long. And so at the very top, I'll place my cursor and keep this nicely organized. I'll just push that down, and right here at the top, I'm gonna click on this button, and add the table of contents. So if I want to read more about Nick Bottom the Weaver, one of the mechanicals in the play that gets his head turned into a, a donkey, then I can go directly to that area of my very long note. So wonderful organization tool, adding the table of contents. You can also just hit Control T on a Windows keyboard, and that's the pop-up table of contents. So now I'm all the way down in the mechanicals reading about Nick Bottom. I want to jump up and, oh, he cast a spell on Lysander to make him fall out of love with Hermia and into love with Helena. Let's read more about that. I can go directly to Lysander at the top of the page. So that's the table of contents, really, really helpful in very, very long notes. Great, great organizational tool. And you can have that permanent table of contents or just the pop-up table of contents. There it is, pop-up table of contents, Control T, just to get a quick overview of everything going on in that very, very large note. So let's talk, I'm gonna jump ahead a little bit to another bullet point, working non-linearly. And working non-linearly is really one of the basic fundamental advantages of using the brain. Information is stored according to how it's related with other pieces of information, not like a file and folder system. And therefore, you can take advantage of that and really start displaying relationships between pieces of information, how they're connected, what else they're connected to and why, and so forth. And I've done that with a character study of Midsummer Night's Dream. Have no fear if you're not familiar with A Midsummer Night's Dream. It's basically one of the sort of a French romance comedy, if you're familiar with those types of movies like Faulty Towers. And there's a lot of confusion going on, and people are chasing each other, in this case, through the woods. There's fairies playing magical tricks on some of the characters, and there is sort of I'm not sure if he's a king, but Aegeus, sort of a noble man from Athens, and he's planning a wedding for his daughter Hermia, whom he wants to marry Demetrius. However, notice my links within this area of my brain. So here's Aegeus, the father, his daughter Hermia. As you can see, Hermia loves Lysander. Lysander, I'll activate his thought, loves Helena. Helena loves Demetrius, and Demetrius loves Hermia. So comedy ensues. So my links between different thoughts are not only defining the relationship between those thoughts, but I'm using what's called a directional link label. And I'll add another one. I noticed recently, notice I can click on a link between two thoughts, or if I double click, that opens up the link label. So I can define the relationship between two pieces of information. So if you're working on those creative projects, how does, event A affect event B, or person A, or character, or what have you, whether you're defining the relationship between people, places, things, projects, it doesn't matter. These link labels really, really can help in so many different types of scenarios. And you can also turn these into one-way links or directional links. One-way links is a little more complicated. You only see the link when you're coming from one direction. A directional link is just toggling this button, so I can make the arrow point left or right. Hermia loves Lysander. Now, I noticed, as I mentioned earlier, Titania is sort of the fairy princess who is married to Oberon, and Puck starts playing some tricks. Everyone probably knows who Puck is. He casts spells on Lysander, casts spells on Bottom, but he actually casts a spell. I forgot until recently. I was reviewing this. He actually casts a spell temporarily on Titania to fall in love with Nick Bottom the Weaver when he's got the donkey head. So I can double click on this link and I'll say cast the spell. And I'll make it directional. So I just simply toggle. So Puck cast the spell on Titania, and Titania then falls in love with temporarily. I'll call this temporary love. and make that directional as well. And since it's love, I like to sort of color code. There we go. So we can now clearly see that Titania temporarily falls in love with Nick Bottom, the Weaver. So directional links and all these cross links between your information can really, really help you with a storyline, with a plot, with defining relationships between thoughts. So actually, I talked a little bit about idea warehousing. This is an idea warehouse. All my thoughts, all my data coming together in one place and being further defined according to links, relationships, and the notes that I keep on them. My timeline for a better understanding the information also falls under idea warehousing. So that's just me putting together sort of where Shakespeare worked and when, and the plays that he wrote during that time. So now let's start talking about brainstorming. Brainstorming is getting a high level overview of how all of your information fits together. The first thing I like to talk about when we're looking at a brain and talking about brainstorming are some of the different views that are available. I'm going to go all the way back to William Shakespeare. I am actually going to minimize my content area and focus just directly on the plex. And I'll even make this just a little bit smaller, my text size with the text slider. And I'm going to go into what we call mind map view. And mind map view allows you to get an overview of your content, of your data, the storyline that you're writing, all the different, maybe you've got areas for characters, you've got areas for events within the stories or chapters or whatever the case may be. Sometimes you need to just sit back and get a high level overview to see how it all fits together. And this is mind map view. Now, I'm broadcasting at a very low resolution so that I'm not taking up a lot of bandwidth as I click through the brain so that you can see what I'm clicking on. But regardless, anytime I click on the plus sign, I add another generation. So there you can see I'm getting into the literature and all the different sonnets. I've got 152 sonnets. So I've got another monitor here that's much, much larger, and mind map view is a really, really great way of getting this high level overview of all of my data and information and starting to see cross links and relationships and so forth in my writing. Another thing that helps me with brainstorming and understanding my data it is a new feature within the brain called link backs and mentions. So let's take a look at those now. I'm going to jump back into normal view of the brain. And I'm just going to come down here. Let me open up my notes once again, and I'll go into literature. I'm making my fonts just a little bit larger now. And let's go into the history plays and Henry IV, Part 1. So I'm just selecting, I was here earlier, so I came into this thought. Link backs and mentions are a way of helping you to better understand the context of the brains that you create. As you're typing within the notes, your brain is actually being indexed by your operating system. So on a Mac, that is Spotlight. Sorry, it escaped my organic brain for a second. And on a Windows machine, it is being indexed using Windows Desktop Search. So as you're typing, all of that information becomes instantly searchable within the brain. Now, typically, if you see a word, new broils, what does broils mean? I could do a search for broils and see if that shows up. And as you can see, it shows up in quite a few other locations within the brain. Now, it looks like I don't have a word for broil or a reference for broils in my dictionary yet. So I'm actually going to create one. I'm going to jump over into, this is a good example because it doesn't exist. I'm going to jump into my resources and then into my dictionary. And we'll go into all the B words. So I keep track of words that I don't understand. Now, some of this I started putting together with just the help of some online Shakespearean dictionaries that are out there. And then I add to it as the years go on. So at one point, I didn't know what the heck bat fouling meant. And it means actually going out at night means of using a net and torches and poles to actually catch bats. And in the Tempest, they talk about we would so, and then go a bat fouling, like let's go catch some bats with with nets. So I had to do the research and type what that in. My new word is broils, so I'm going to create a new thought, broils, and I'll activate that thought. It's here in my past thought list. So there's the word that I just created, broils. I'm going to use the brain's built-in um, indexing capabilities, or not indexing, excuse me, web search capabilities. So I click on F4 to open up the brain's search web feature. So I'm searching the web. I like to use Bing. There's a drop-down menu. You can specify how you want to search. I'm going to search for the meaning of the word broils, and I'll just copy this content to become very hot or to cook meat. Well, that makes a lot of sense. Okay, so I just copy that and I'll Control Shift V, so I strip out the formatting, and it's a verb, take that out. So there it is. I can reference exactly what broils means, and as you can see down below, this is where I skip ahead to another bullet point, aggregated content. And the word broil is being used over and over. In fact, Shakespeare uses it 19 times within his writing. So I can see how often a particular word is being used within a brain that I'm creating. So these are our unlinked mentions. And if I go to Henry IV, part 1, you can see that's where I was earlier. I'll click and navigate to that thought. And right there at the top, broils. And as you can see, all these words that have this blue underline underneath are words that are created as a thought elsewhere in my brain. So if I don't know what ranks mean, I can simply right click and activate rank. And rank is swollen, perhaps pace. So that's my definition, and I can see it's been used 84 times within Shakespeare's writing. So these are unlinked mentions. If it's really, really important to you to create a link, you're often going to be going from that word in the note to the thought. You can make that I'm going to right click, and you can make that a linked mention. So that becomes, in other words, a backlink. And when I find this word rank in A Midsummer Night's Dream, I can click on it and it'll take me directly to this thought rather than having to right click first and select to navigate. So those are the difference. A word first when it's being noticed that it exists elsewhere within the brain. It is going to show up as an unlinked mention, and then you have the choice of right clicking and making it a permanent link to become a backlink. So the choice is yours. It depends on how often you're going to be using that style of navigating. But this is aggravated content, and it's great to see that, you know, this word rank is being used 83 times by Shakespeare. And if you want to have some fun with this, and if you like this feature could be used in many ways. I use it myself. I do a little bit of amateurish sort of children books writings. And from time to time, I want to know how many times have I used a particular word? Am I using it too much in the story? Do I need to get into my synonym list? Let's just jump over to a common word. I'll just go into L and I'll create light. But soft, what light through yonder window breaks? It is the east, and Juliet is the sun. So there I've created the word light, and the brain is going to aggregate the content and tell me it's just taking a while to populate since I just created this thought. It's looking through all of my notes throughout my brain. In this case, Shakespeare has used the word light 271 times, and I can go to any one of these thoughts, in this case, a Shakespearean work of art, and find where that word is being used. Another way of doing that I've used in the past as well, if I go to Midsummer Night's Dream, and I can just do there's a search and replace in your notes, so I can search for a word and replace it, but I can also say light and go to the next example, and you can see it highlights down here at the very bottom, but I can scroll through the word light to find all locations of that word within an individual note as well. And with that, I just want to shift now to, once again, out of the Shakespeare Brain. And I've referenced a few times another brain that I use for my own writing. So obviously we're covering today using the brain for creative writing. This is obviously creative writing that already exists. I myself have written just for fun, a couple of children's books. I keep track of everything going on in the brain. So my new book ideas, my current books that I've read or written, so I can click on any one of these, Hemlock the Lost Sock, and go down through, there it is, written in the actual content of the note. And I have got my resources. So my resources change from brain to brain. My resources for my Shakespeare brain is a more like dictionary, the timeline of Shakespeare, understanding iambic pentameter and structures of poetry and so forth. My resources here become much more like Shelley mentioned earlier. What words rhyme? I use the rhyming zone quite a bit. What word rhymes with orange? It's always a fun one. Nothing in the English language really rhymes with orange. So it did find a couple of words that I didn't even know existed. But if I want to say, all right, what word rhymes with light? Change that search. I'm writing a poetry and spite, plight, night, kite, right, and so forth. So I can find rhyming words. And it's just really nice to be able to jump over to my resources and look these up. I recently found another use for this area of my brain. I'm keeping track of letter combinations. When I'm writing, sometimes I need to find that poetic word and change things around. That's another way to find rhyming words, light, right, kites, flight, and so forth. Those letter combinations are actually called, here, let me scroll down. Those are actually called diagraphs. So here's some consonant diagraphs, trigraphs, and then vowel diagraphs as well. So two letters that commonly go well together. And I mentioned I recently found a new use for this, and those of you that are in the know will know that Wordle, a great way to sort of get through a Wordle is to better understand your consonant diagraphs. They can really help you to sort of lower your Wordle score. So it sometimes just helps me to stare at the alphabet, stare at the English language, look at a translator to find another word, commonly used word, for fish or dog or cat or what have you. Graphics inspire me, so I keep track of favorite graphics, thesauruses. So these are all basically web-based language and alphabet sites that help me with my writings. And then of course I keep track of publishers. You can see I haven't done a mailing list in quite a while. It's sort of just a random hobby I have. But I have sent out works to different publishers just to get their feedback from time to time. And I think even on not my ideas, but under current books, I'll keep track of, which mailing this went out in. So this particular book went out in my 2016 mailing, and then I did another one in 2020. So I don't mail it to the same, the same publisher twice, that sort of thing. So and this is, by the way, is not a brain that we'll be sharing today. This is my own unique personal brain for my own writing. But I just want to share with you that some of the tricks that I used today in the Shakespeare brain and that Shelley demonstrated for you can be used in so many different ways. I think the first question we had today is, are you going to be talking about using the brain for fiction or nonfiction?
Yes, that was
And
one of the questions.
yeah, the first questions that came up. And the answer is you can use the features that we've shared with you for your style of writing. Shelley even mentioned maybe you're just putting together a newsletter or a pamphlet, a company brochure. That's writing as well. And keeping track of that data, all the information, all your resources in a trusted source. The brain is a great tool to help you along the way. And with that, Shelley, I think I can wrap things up with the Bard Brain. Do we have any questions out there that we would like
Yes.
to cover?
Yeah, we do have a number of questions.
Great.
Lots of compliments as usual on the Bard Brain. Shakespeare and the Shakespeare Brain never fails to disappoint. So we do have that available. That's available. My writer's brain is available.
Mhm.
Happy to share those. You can take them and move them around. One question that jumped out at me earlier on in the session I'd like to cover is Lou. And he says, all these components often turn into abstraction. At what point do you actually start to write the piece, and where do you do the writing? So, okay, so I'm going to break that down because that's actually two questions. So the first question is, how do you customize your brain workspace? But the second component of that we didn't get a chance to talk on, because I was like, I wanted to pan through my brain because I know everyone was excited to see Shakespeare, was just file management, document management. We have talked about how to add all those wonderful notes, but actually how to start a document in the brain and do some document control.
Sure.
So Lou, to answer your question, if you're finding your Plex too distracting, you can just make that smaller. Your notes area can be fully turned off or on. So Matt, we'll show you a little bit of that. And then I want to jump into adding files and actually creating a document directly from a thought and doing
Great.
just a
Yes.
little bit of light document management, showing
Absolutely.
versioning.
So I'm just going to jump into, I'll go into literature once again, tragedies. Maybe this time we'll pick on Hamlet. We referenced him earlier. And if I am reading through Hamlet, I don't want to be distracted by all the other tragedy plays that are out there, the other plays that Shakespeare wrote while working at the Globe Theater, movies involving Hamlet, and so forth. There's a lot to look at over here. So as Shelley mentioned, my focus right now needs to be just reading through Hamlet. So I am actually going to minimize the buttons here on the bar that splits your content area from your Plex can be easily modified. We call it a smart splitter because it does more than just split the screen in two. I can flip flop to a left, right, right, left, under, over, under. So whatever view works best for me. And I can even minimize using the arrows. I'll now minimize the Plex. And now I am just full screen with the Plex of, or no, the Plex is not displayed, full screen with the script of Hamlet. And I can take my time reading through the script. When I'm ready to get back to the Plex, start navigating through the brain, the arrow will bring back the Plex. And I actually want to switch this back to my left right view, my original view. So you can easily move those around, and we did look at earlier that you can also resize or change the structure. If you want a higher level overview, you can go into that mind map view that we looked at earlier, or even what we call normal +1. So you're looking at 2 generations away from the active thought, and focus on just the tragedies of Shakespeare. So there's ways to change the Plex around to really focus on your current purpose or whatever it is that you're researching within the brain. And then with regards to file management, let's go into Hamlet, and let's say I want to write a new document on maybe I saw a version of Hamlet just recently, and I want to write a review of what I thought, how I thought that things went. So as I mentioned earlier, I've got my overview of Hamlet and my notes. I can click on attach, and we cover these also in the Brain 101. So if this is all new to you, that you can add file attachments and documents to thoughts within the brain, please join a Friday Brain 101, and I'll take you through these step by step at a much slower pace. But really quickly, this is a really, really great feature of the brain, especially for writing. Where do you keep that data? Where do you actually write your script? I click on the attach button, and the notes, as I referenced earlier, are written using Markdown. So if I attach another Markdown file attachment, so I just scroll down and say, add a Markdown file, and maybe it's even going to be, my Hamlet script. So maybe I'm doing a parody of Hamlet. It basically creates a secondary note, and I can now start typing chapter 1, introduction. So I can start typing my script, and when I want to close this, I just hit the X and I go back to the default view of the content area, which is the note, the full script of Hamlet, and I now have 2 attachments, my original overview and now my new Hamlet script that I'm writing. And I can write that directly in the note using all the markdown formatting. So I can add those tables of contents anytime I type a word that exists elsewhere in the brain, that will be highlighted, and so forth. So that's a great way to add just secondary, like additional notes, additional MD files. Also, you can attach Word documents, Excel spreadsheets, PDF files. You can drag and drop into the brain. And Shelley, I'm not sure how much detail you want me to go into
No, I
here,
think that's great. And I just want
but
to let
yeah,
people know you can actually launch the document because there's kind of like two different writers, like a lot of the creatives. And I know and especially those people that are literally using the brain as a note-taking app. They are so big on notes and backlinks and things like that. But then and they tend to be, they don't have to be, but more of the corporate users, like say even my use case where I'm taking a note more to remind myself, but all my writing, because I'm actually sharing a document and Brigitte's editing it and things like that, is a Word document. So I just also wanted to make sure, because we have so many amazing note features, that you do realize that the brain is also a file management tool, and I love it. For document management, because I'll have version 1, 2, 3, 4. You can save as back into the brain, and I can
mhm,
take a little note on the side about, oh, this version contains the section on our corporate bio plate. This one was edited to fit an ad that we're running. Like that kind of thing, that really practical aspect of document management and what these different versions mean. Very important. Likewise for just things like closing financing or loan documentation too. You get so many documents. So again, this is a little bit beyond
yeah,
my mapping Shakespeare and creativity, but in order to be creative, you need to be organized. So I just wanted to make sure. I thought that question was interesting that came at the beginning
yeah,
of Lou, and I wanted to make sure we'd gone full circle on that.
great.
Great. So next question is from Ted, and Ted is wondering, can you add rich media and video files? So the answer to that, Ted, is yes. You do want to be careful about the file size. The cool thing about the brain too, for those of you, obviously we're syncing a lot to the cloud, and that's the fun of it, accessing it on your phone and your mobile. But if you have super large files that you just want on your desktop, remember we have that very powerful desktop application that you can keep everything locally. And then of course, video files, adding YouTube looks amazing, and Matt's going there. So I'll let Matt, you take over on demoing how to add a YouTube file into your brain.
Sure. And actually, I've got another thought about, it's interesting that this one came up. During the pandemic and during COVID, a lot of theaters went dark. And many theaters, in order to stay relevant and active, they had virtual presentations of plays, and they were a lot of fun to watch, actually. You could watch Utah Shakespeare's Festival online, and they're saved now in YouTube and other, various places around the web. So this is one of them. I recall seeing this, a full production of Hamlet, and I'm on the YouTube site. I just used the brain search web through YouTube. Brings up the full production of Hamlet. I'm going to drag and drop. And anytime you drag and drop a URL, you're going to not grab the tab, but the little icon in the URL of your favorite browser. So I drag and drop that in. I can drop it down below so it becomes a new thought, or onto Hamlet. I've got a lot of attachments on Hamlet, so I'm going to drop it down below, and it creates this new thought, and it loads up right in the content window. So I can actually watch videos, and I do this quite often with just my own personal projects. If I'm fixing a bike or making a new recipe, I find it online, and the video is right there as an added resources. And it all harkens back to having all of your resources in one collective place, whether it's a video or a graphic or a file or a document or your own personal notes or checklists, all right there within the brain. And with the brain's built-in browser, videos are just fantastic
Yeah, and
additions to
actually,
your content.
on a related note, we actually have an amazing cardiothoracic surgery brain
Mm-hmm.
created by Dr. Craig Baker at USC for his students, where they have, in addition to all their PDFs, they have videos of how to perform different surgical techniques. So videos can be any number of things too. They can be cool inspirational videos, all your favorites, but you can get really how to. I
Mm-hmm.
also created a brain when I was learning to play keyboards and piano, I have a bunch of videos of how people are doing different chord structures and stuff. So that's a really fun thing to do, and also to cruise through them in an easy way. And that preview pane, I just can't tell you how powerful that is, because you sort of have your visual map of your thinking, but then you can kind of look at your content very quickly and find things. All right, next question is from Steve. Steve is asking, could you recap how the different link types are defined, i.e. permanent, backlinks, unlinked, mention?
Absolutely. So here, I'll just stay in Hamlet. I'm going to scroll down, and it really depends on your theme of the brain. And what I mean by that is, you can see I've got sort of this old parchment looking wallpaper for my brain. You can have dark themes, light themes. You can change the color coding of the brain to really reflect your personality. So I always hate to say, look for the blue underlined words in your notes, because in some themes it's red or green or what have you. But the default settings are typically a blue underline means it is a mention, meaning here's Horatio, for example. Horatio is a word in my note that is also exists as a thought. So that is an unlinked mention. And if I right click on Horatio, I can select to activate and go directly to that thought. So this is the thought for Horatio. If I am going to be following that link often, that's when I want to change it from an unlinked mention to a backlink. So the two link back and forth. And here I'll select guard, I right click, and I will link. Oh, there's two examples of guards. There we go. So I can link and go directly to guards. So it's not just always a guard like a soldier, but sometimes it's two stairs of Ursa Minor. So we're called the guard. So it's actually referencing Ursa Minor, the Little Dipper, Big Dipper, yeah, Little Dipper. So it's mentioned, it's
Cool.
a navigational theme reference. So that's
Nice.
good to know. Yeah, you might
Mm-hmm.
see, why is he looking at space and talking about
Hmm.
guards? Well, he's actually navigating using the stars. So and Shakespeare used it 128 times or 120 times through all of the plays.
Whoa, I did not know that. Very
Yeah,
cool.
yeah.
All right, great. We have a question from Victor. Victor is asking, are there screen size options for notes? And he's interested in making his notes wider. So just a little bit
Oh,
on
this is
how
fun.
to customize the different note
Yeah,
size options.
yeah. Oh, this is a great, great question, Shelley, because I'm going to get
Well,
into a
thank you,
feature
Victor.
of the brain. Thank you, Victor. This is a great question because I'm going to get into a what's the right phrasing? I'm going to see it when I click on the button. It's an experimental feature within the brain. So if you're running the latest, greatest version of the brain, you can download the brain software from our website, as we've mentioned. If you go into options and preferences, on the system tab, you can specify if you want to be on the stable, alpha, or beta channels. The alpha channel means that you have a version of the brain that our engineers are testing. We've got, longtime users of the brain that really love getting the latest, greatest features, whether they work or not. So you might run into a bug from time to time. We'll never release anything that's going to harm your data. If anything, it'll just be a feature that doesn't quite work the way you expect it to. And that's in the alpha channel, okay? So that's sort of experimental version, the next release. And once we know for a fact it's stable, it's working the way we like, we bump it up to the stable channel. By default, when you install the brain, you're on the stable channel. If you'd like, you could switch to alpha and you get these wonderful little experimental features. And I'm going to share one with you now. So I click on the experimental tab and I'm going to go to the multi-column notes layout. And I'm going to close this and I'm going to minimize the plex so I'm full screen with the note.
And just as a caveat, you can minimize the plex and resize without
Oh,
going to the
absolutely.
advanced multi-channel, but this is just a very cool thing. So our
Yeah,
advanced users are like, yeah, this is amazing. And our new
yeah.
users are like, do I have to do this? Answer no. So let's finish, let Matt geek out and show you this amazing feature, and then we'll go back to basics
So
because it is very cool.
as you can see, I'm scrolling through and I'm trying to get, so here's a big monologue by Horatio on page 2. That is going to scroll up to the top and then carry over onto page 1. So there's the big long monologue by Horatio. So I've got a two multi-page layout. And it's really, really great on very large monitors. You've got a lot of data. You want to look at the whole document at one time. Multi-page layout is a great way to do that. If you don't feel comfortable with using experimental features of the brain or bumping yourself up to the alpha channel, let's just go back here. I'll bring the Plex back. And just one more feature that I'll share with you. If you go to options, preferences, and experimental, I'll turn off multi-column layout. And I'll just share with you that now I can still minimize the plex. Here's the button, so I can minimize the plex. If I want to see a little
There
bit
it is.
more on a large screen, notice it's just one page, but then I can use the text slider. So I can make the fonts really large or super, super small, depending on how strong your readers are. So those are the different options that you have and you can experiment with.
Awesome. Very cool. Yeah. So you can take that as, you can be as easy or as interesting. Nice preview there, Matt. And actually, George and a few other users have been writing in that they are using other writers' tools and they are interested in understanding export and import options as far as your
Sure.
brain.
Sure. So there are many different import options. We wouldn't be able to go through all of them, but anyone can click on File and select to import and sort of review. If you click on it, it'll tell you a little bit more about what it takes to import that structure. So for folders, if you've got an existing folder, let's say I kept all of my Shakespearean information in files and folders, it'd be very linear, right? And I'd have one folder called Shakespeare, and then below that, tragedies, comedies, sonnets, poetry, and so forth, history, and then folders below that, and then files below that, and so forth. Every folder becomes a thought, and every file is an attachment in its corresponding folder. So I'm basically visualizing that file folder structure. And then from there, once I get into the brain, I can start drawing all those cross references that really help me to better understand the context. Properly formatted text documents or outlines can be imported. Although, excuse me, also other common mind mapping pieces of software, MMAP files and MM files can be imported. If you would like a sample of a text outline, or an XML document that can be imported into the brain, just send a note into support@thebrain.com and we'll send you a sample file and say, here's what the formatting looks like so you better understand it. Copy that or save that file and import it into a test brain. And you can see exactly how it works and then better understand how your document should be formatted. So that being said, if you don't see your file type, you've got some fancy new writing software and it saves things as .abc files, obviously that's not going to import into the brain. However, if that utility, whatever it is, can be exported into a text file, properly formatted outline, an XML file, and so forth, then there's potential for you to actually import that data into the brain. Or if you can export that into a file and folder system, you can then bring the file and folder system into the brain. So
And then it
many
was the
different
other
options there.
way. People were
Yep.
wondering, like, if they have a Word document, let's say I created an outline of my story in the
Mm-hmm.
brain, how could
Yep.
I export that into a Word document just to see that outline?
Yes. So let's say I wanted to export all of the tragedies into an outline for book I'm writing about Shakespearean tragedies. So I'm going to go through this really, really quickly, but we are recording today, so you
Yeah.
can go back to the recording
Yeah,
and
we're
watch
going
this in
a
slow
little bit
motion.
into overtime.
Yeah,
So for those of you that have to run off at noon, we really appreciate your time. I think I have a couple more questions in the Q&A and we're going to end the session, but this will be recorded and we
sure.
appreciate your time.
Great.
And
So
back
I'm going to
to
control click
export.
on tragedy. So
Hmm.
control clicking on a Mac, you would command click, and it adds that thought to the selection box. I can control click on gates to add a whole grouping of thoughts. Control click again, and whatever you clicked on will be removed from your selection box. There's also this more advanced feature where I can say, all right, I've control clicked on tragedy, and now I can say edit, select related thoughts. So I'm just going down, just child word thoughts for, we'll say 6 generations away, and say okay. And as you can see, that added 40 thoughts into my selection box. I can now right click and copy as a text outline. And let me just open some basic note
And
editor.
by the way,
Right click.
the mass selection that Matt just did now works between brains. So let's say you love only one play in Matt's Shakespeare Brain and you've downloaded, you could just copy that out and put it into your own new brain and
Yes.
customize further. So again, mass selection, we covered a little more in 101, but just kind of another idea because I know a lot of you are asking, for these examples or my writer's brain, maybe you just want the
Yeah.
writer's resources section. You don't need to know about my blue rose story. So that's another great way to, you can delete that stuff too once you get the copy, but at the same time, if you want to copy things out and add to your own brain, that's an idea for you too.
Yeah. In my test or my example, I just copied the text outline. There's an option to actually copy
Yeah,
the thoughts,
right.
and you can paste that into a new brain. And that copies everything, the file attachments for that thoughts, the icons, the notes, links,
Mhm.
thought types and tags, if you're using those features. It all gets copied and pasted into the other brain. And then of course you can also, oh, well, with that selection box, here, let me select a few more thoughts again. I'll
Oh
copy those.
no, we're starting the
I
selection box on the hour. No, we're gonna time box this.
All right,
It
I
is
can
a
also
great
click on
feature though.
File, Export, and I
Yeah.
can export the entire brain or only what I just selected
Mhm.
into a .txt file or JSON. So that's, if you, any programmers or engineers out there that know a lot about JSON files, you can export to JSON as well. And once again, we've got some more information about JSON formatting in our with our support team. Write a note to support@thebrain.com and we'll fill you in a little bit so you better understand what these JSON exports contain.
All right, great. And then just a few more questions. Thanks to everyone for sticking around. And we're going to close the session in a couple minutes here. But Rebecca had an interesting question. I like to keep most of my writing sources in a reference manager. So I have reference citation management. I need to access them. If I wanted to do all my thinking, initial writing, and project managing the brain, where would I keep my sources to access them in both? Well, this, Rebecca, kind of speaks to just integrating with a wide variety of programs, like from Evernote to OneNote to, I think you mentioned a different program in your example, to even Microsoft SharePoint in a corporate setting. If that program you're using has unique URLs, whether it's, let's say, on a shared file drive, or it's you can literally just copy and paste those URLs either into the notes or in the thought structure, which is kind of nice to launch them.
Yeah,
The only thing you've got to be careful about is when you're copying different URLs is, of course, let's say you're doing it and this program exists on your corporate intranet. Keep in mind, if you are outside of your corporate intranet, you may not be able to get to it. But the brain is really great at integrating a disparate amount of these different third-party applications. The trick is the third-party app itself needs to be open, needs to give the brain that URL or relative path. And if you can get that path, then you can link to it in the brain.
that's right.
So I think that was it. I'm just scanning. I think we've got it all. So I think, Matt, any final words of wisdom from yourself or channeling Shakespeare? It was a great session today. We all had a lot of fun looking at the Shakespeare Brain and all these other interesting examples.
It was, and everyone on today's webinar will receive an email with a link to the recording of the brain. It'll also be available from our homepage at thebrain.com. But on the landing page for the recording, that's where we'll have links for you to download Shelley's Brain, view it online, the Shakespeare Brain as well. Those links will be there for you to play around with as well.
All
And
right, great.
yeah, thanks everyone for joining us today. Always a pleasure to spend a day with Shakespeare.
Yeah, thanks. And as Matt mentioned earlier, the 101 is tomorrow, 10 a.m. Pacific time. We packed a lot, and you can see we were geeking out on all these new features. And so if you're a new user and you're like, whoa, this is too much, it does not have to be. Like, there are obviously different levels. Like, we want the existing users to have fun on these webinars too. So if you need to take a step back, join us on that 101 class on every Friday.
Tomorrow.
Or if you're an advanced user, yeah, it's tomorrow, you can pop in at the end, and because it's a smaller class size, Matt can actually demo each question. We got most of them, and Chase actually answered most of them manually, but in that class, you'll actually get your question demoed. So even if you have something, you just want more of an interactive support session, you can even pop in towards the end of that. So think of that as a resource. And I think that's it. With that, I wish you all well in unleashing your creativity, whether you're mind mad being Shakespeare or your next big new product idea. I think you can you get a sense of how you can do it very well on the brain. And we hope to see you on future Brain Technologies events. So thanks everyone, and have a great day.
Thanks everyone.